It was Mother's Day, and the smell of slightly burnt toast and that sickly sweet, cheap department store cologne Mark always insisted on wearing hung heavy in the air, a scent that, until that moment, symbolized a kind of comforting, deeply domestic mediocrity. Mark, my husband of 15 years, had attempted to make breakfast, and while the eggs were passable, the effort itself was what mattered. Everything felt normal, annoyingly, reassuringly normal. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the morning sun streaming in, when Lily, my 11-year-old daughter, walked in. Her hair was still messy from sleep, but her small hands held a beautiful, meticulously crafted card. It was covered in glitter and stickers, clearly something she'd spent hours on at school. She approached me, her eyes wide, almost feverish, and she held the card out with a slight tremble in her hands. I took it, smiling brightly, ready for the usual sweet, misspelled ode to my brilliance as a mother. But as I opened the heavy cardstock, I realized something was wrong. There was no poem. Instead, wedged deep into the fold, secured with a tiny piece of masking tape that Lily must have applied herself, was a minuscule, neatly typed note. It wasn't written in marker. It was typed, sterile, and horrifying. I had to squint to read the tiny courier font. It said, "Mom, you need to look at Dad's travel bag. He's leaving. He booked the flight for Thursday. The key is in the lining of his old tennis shoes, where he thinks no one will look." I'm sorry. The world tilted. Just like that. In the span of reading 30 innocuous, devastating words, the foundation of my life evaporated. I looked up at my husband, Mark, who was smiling across the breakfast table, oblivious to the nuclear bomb Lily had just placed in my lap, casually stirring his coffee and asking if I wanted more syrup. How do you sit there, sipping lukewarm, watery coffee, knowing the man you build a life with, the father of the child sitting next to you, is planning to vanish in 4 days, taking everything he can, and that your own sensitive, terrified child was forced to become your secret messenger, risking his wrath and her own emotional safety? The question I have wrestled with ever since, the one that keeps me up even now, is this: was I wrong for pretending everything was fine for the next 72 hours, just so I could gather my evidence, secure my future, and craft the perfect, utterly devastating counterattack? Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same thing. This story, or rather, this chapter of my life, begins not on that Mother's Day morning, but much further back, maybe a year ago, when the cracks first started to appear. Mark and I had met in college. We were the classic opposites attract cliché. I was the pragmatic, detail-oriented analyst, and he was the charming, big-picture dreamer. He was ambitious, a little reckless, and incredibly successful in sales and finance, always chasing the next big deal. I was the rock, the one who handled the logistics, the bills, the home, and eventually Lily's entire childhood schedule. For years it worked. He brought in the excitement and the money. I provided the stability and the foundation. We had the nice house, the 2 cars, the annual beach vacation. It looked, from the outside, like a postcard of suburban bliss. But about a year ago, the dynamic shifted. Mark started pulling away. It was subtle at first. The way he'd suddenly need to take calls in the garage, the way his phone became physically glued to his palm and face down on every surface, the new, almost manic focus on his appearance. He started spending 3 nights a week, traveling for work, trips that always seemed vague and resulted in little actual profit that I could see, even though I managed our joint finances. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd employ the classic deflection technique, accuse me of being jealous, say I was suffocating his ambition, or remind me that he was the one who provided for us. I always backed down. I hated confrontation, and honestly, the thought of dismantling our life, of breaking Lily's heart, was enough to make me swallow every suspicion. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was the pressure of his high-stakes job. I told myself he was just hitting a midlife wall and would eventually climb back over it. But deep down, the analyst in me knew the numbers weren't adding up, and the narrative he was feeding me had too many plot holes. The most painful part of that year wasn't the distance between us, but the silence Lily maintained. Lily is perceptive, almost unnervingly so. She reads body language like a seasoned detective. She stopped asking Dad to play games or read to her. She just watched. She watched him pack. She watched him lie, and she watched me pretend not to notice. Her silence was louder than any argument we could have had. Fast forward to Mother's Day, Sunday. The day I got the note. Mark had left immediately after breakfast, claiming he had an emergency client call and would be back around 5 to take us out to dinner. Perfect. That gave me 6 hours. I walked over to Lily, who was cleaning up her plate, and gave her a long, hard hug. I whispered into her hair, "Thank you, sweetheart. I love you more than anything. I'm going to fix this, okay? But you can't say a single word about this note to anyone." She just nodded, her face pale, clinging to my waist. Her bravery, her willingness to risk everything to protect me, gave me the steel I needed. I realized this wasn't just about my broken marriage. It was about protecting my daughter from a man who valued his secrets over her peace of mind. My first task was confirming the note. Mark's running shoes, the ancient, smelly pair he swore he'd never throw out, were by the back door. I went into the laundry room, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the detergent bottle. I picked up the left shoe, feeling around the frayed lining of the tongue. Nothing. My heart sank. Maybe it was a bad joke. Maybe Lily had imagined it. Then I checked the heel. Tucked deep, almost fused into the rubber, was a tiny, flat metallic object. A key. It was too small for the front door or the garage. It was an interior key, the kind used for small locks or safes. I pocketed it. Now, the travel bag. Mark had a battered, old leather duffel he used for all his business trips. It was usually stored in the attic, but he'd brought it down Saturday, claiming he needed to repack his gear for an early Monday flight. It was sitting right in the corner of his side of the closet. I closed the bedroom door and started searching. The first layer was clothes, boring, expensive shirts. The second layer was electronics, laptop, chargers, things that didn't fit the narrative. But then I found it. Tucked underneath a false bottom, secured by a faint zipper I'd never noticed before, was an envelope. Inside were 3 things that confirmed every terrible suspicion I had harbored for a year. First, 2 one-way plane tickets, not to Dallas or Chicago, but to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. The flight departed Thursday at 6 a.m. Second, bank statements for a separate, offshore account opened 3 months ago, showing a significant chunk of our joint savings. Money I thought was earmarked for Lily's college had been transferred out. The transfer date? Friday. Third, and most crushing, was the romantic note. It was written on cheap, floral stationery, addressed to my Marky, detailing how excited she was for their new beginning and how she couldn't wait to finally be free with him. She signed off as Chloe. I stood there in the silent, sunlit bedroom, gripping the papers, and the initial wave of nausea gave way to a cold, frightening clarity. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was premeditated abandonment and financial theft. Mark wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving us high and dry. He was taking the money, stealing Lily's future, and expecting to ride off into the sunset with his Chloe, while I was left to pick up the pieces and figure out how to pay the mortgage. The rage that filled me was not hot and impulsive. It was glacial, calculated, and sharp. I spent the next 3 hours in that room, analyzing the evidence, the key still burning a hole in my pocket. I realized the flight was set for Thursday morning. Today was Sunday. I had Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. 72 hours of complete emotional control. 72 hours to dismantle his life with the precision of a trained assassin. I knew, instinctively, that confronting him immediately would only result in a chaotic fight, lies, and Mark scrambling to hide his remaining assets. He would win the short game. I had to win the long game. I had to make sure that when he walked out that door on Thursday morning, he wasn't walking into paradise. He was walking straight into a bureaucratic and financial hellscape of his own making. The key was the next crucial step. Where did it go? Mark was incredibly paranoid about his work, specifically his side hustle, which I always suspected was a little shady. He had a small, locked mahogany box tucked away high up in his closet, disguised amongst old financial textbooks. I had never seen him open it, and I had certainly never been allowed to touch it. I retrieved the box, my hands still steady now, fueled by pure adrenaline and betrayal. The small key from the running shoe fit the lock perfectly. Inside, the contents were far more damaging than I could have imagined. It wasn't just savings bonds or old jewelry. It was a burner phone I hadn't known about, filled with incriminating texts with Chloe, sure, but more importantly, it held 2 encrypted USB drives. Mark was sloppy, but he was also arrogant. He assumed I'd never look, or that even if I did, I wouldn't understand. But remember, I was the pragmatic analyst, the one who handled the logistics. I immediately plugged the first USB drive into my laptop. It was protected by a complex password, but I knew Mark. His passwords were always a variation of his first successful stock ticker symbol, combined with the year he first met Chloe, which, based on the texts, was 2022. I tried it. Success. The drive contained thousands of documents, correspondence with shell corporations, offshore tax evasion schemes, and, worst of all, detailed evidence of corporate espionage against his main competitor. Mark wasn't just planning to retire early. He was running away because his entire professional empire was a house of cards ready to collapse. He wasn't leaving me $50,000 for Lily's tuition. He was leaving me debt and possible legal exposure. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was self-preservation. My plan solidified over the next hour. It was detailed, ruthless, and timed to the second. I called my trusted friend, Sarah, a sharp corporate lawyer, and told her I needed an emergency divorce filing based on financial fraud and abandonment, without revealing the specifics. I told her I would provide the documents by Monday morning. She agreed to meet me first thing. Next, I took photos of everything, the tickets, the offshore bank statements, the romantic note, and most importantly, the key legal documents confirming his fraudulent business activities on the USB drives. I didn't delete the information. I copied it, left the key back in the running shoe, and put the mahogany box exactly where I found it. Mark returned around 5:30 p.m., smelling of cologne and fake sincerity. He brought me a single, wilted rose and apologized profusely for being gone on Mother's Day, claiming the client emergency was unavoidable. The performance was flawless. And my performance was even better. I smiled. I thanked him for the rose, and I told him the breakfast was delicious. Lily watched us both from the living room, her small face expressionless, a silent co-conspirator in the grandest act of deception I'd ever pulled off. We went out to dinner, and I listened to him talk about his supposed future business trips, knowing he was just reciting his carefully crafted lies. I ate my steak, savoring every bite, knowing this was the last meal I would ever share with him in peace. Monday morning, Mark kissed me goodbye and headed off to work, completely unaware that he was walking into a week that would systematically destroy his life. I drove straight to Sarah's office, handed her the evidence, and she immediately went to work drafting the papers and securing a temporary restraining order on the remaining joint accounts, citing the offshore transfers as proof of intent to flee. The legal side was handled. But I needed more than just a quick divorce. I needed justice that would sting professionally, where Mark lived and breathed. He cared about his reputation more than he cared about our marriage. While Sarah worked on the divorce, I worked on the corporate espionage documents. I created a throwaway email account, ensuring every connection was masked through a VPN, and crafted an extremely concise, professional email. The subject line was chillingly simple: evidence of fraud and espionage related to the Mark's company name merger. I attached the necessary documents from the USB drive that pointed directly to him siphoning funds and violating NDA agreements. I didn't send it yet. The timing had to be perfect. Tuesday was quiet. Mark was unusually jovial, humming around the house, likely daydreaming about Chloe and Cabo. I watched him, completely detached, feeling like I was observing a character in a bad play. I spent the day with Lily, helping her with homework, baking cookies, the ultimate facade of normalcy, knowing that by Thursday, our lives would be utterly transformed. We talked about silly things, and I reassured her, again and again, that she was safe and loved, and that what was happening was not her fault. Her shoulders seemed to drop an inch, relieved that the secret, the horrifying weight of knowledge, was being actively managed by an adult. The greatest challenge was sleeping next to him those nights. Feeling his arm flop across me, listening to his self-satisfied snoring, knowing that every breath he took was built on a lie directed at my financial ruin. I slept maybe 2 hours total over those 3 nights, surviving on pure, cold spite and coffee. Tuesday night, I finalized the second phase of my plan. I knew Mark had a major, high-profile investor meeting scheduled for Wednesday afternoon, a meeting that, if successful, would secure his promotion and massive bonus. That bonus was part of the money he planned to steal. I timed the email. I scheduled the anonymous corporate espionage report to hit the inboxes of his company's HR director, legal counsel, and the CEO of the competing firm at exactly 3 p.m. on Wednesday. The minute that meeting would be starting. The goal wasn't just to get him fired. The goal was to blow up his entire professional credibility in the most humiliating, public way possible. Wednesday morning dawned. Mark was chipper. "Big day, babe," he chirped, tying his tie. "This meeting is going to secure our future." I just smiled, handed him his carefully packed lunch, and wished him luck, knowing his future was already secured, just not the way he thought. I remember Wednesday afternoon with absolute precision. I was sitting on the sofa with Lily, watching an old movie, trying to appear calm, but my hands were sweating profusely. At exactly 3 p.m., my phone, which I had set to silent, vibrated with a message from Sarah, the lawyer. It was short. Emergency hearing granted based on initial documents. Restraining orders on assets confirmed. Final papers ready for service. Phase 1, complete. Then, at 3:15 p.m., Mark's phone, which he had left charging on the kitchen counter, began to ring incessantly. Then text messages started flooding in, vibrating against the wooden counter. First, they were just work texts. Then they became frantic. "Mark, call me now. This is critical. The deal is off. What is this file? Security is asking questions. Do not come back to the office." I watched the frantic texts pile up for 10 minutes, a grim smile spreading across my face. I knew exactly what was happening on the 10th floor of his corporate building. His life was imploding in real time, thanks to the documents I'd shared. Mark didn't walk in the door that evening. He burst in. His face was gray, his expensive suit rumpled, and the tie was loose around his neck. He looked like a cornered animal. He tossed his briefcase onto the floor, the sound echoing in the silence of the house. "What the hell happened?" he roared, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. My meeting exploded. They accused me of industrial espionage. The CEO. My bonus. It's gone. Everything is gone. He started pacing, ranting about sabotage and rivals. I remained seated on the sofa, Lily next to me, gripping my hand. I waited until he was breathless, until the adrenaline of the day had started to crash. Then I spoke. My voice was calm, almost bored. "It wasn't sabotage, Mark," I said, setting my cup of tea down gently on the coffee table. "It was justice." He stopped dead in his tracks and looked at me, confusion warring with fear. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" "I'm talking about the Cabo tickets," I said. "The offshore accounts. The burner phone. Chloe. And all those delicious documents you hid inside the little mahogany box in the closet." The color drained entirely from his face. It was the moment of complete, shattering realization. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He looked like he was going to vomit. How did you know?" he stammered. "Lily told me," I said, my voice hardening. "She gave me a card on Mother's Day." His eyes immediately darted to our daughter, sitting silently beside me, and that was when the real monster showed itself. "You told her?" he shrieked at Lily. "You little sneak. You traitor. I was going to send you money. I was going to bring you to visit." I stood up, placing myself between him and Lily. "Don't you dare," I hissed, taking a step toward him. "Don't you dare raise your voice to her. She was protecting her mother from a common thief who planned to run away with her college fund. She is a hero. You are nothing. Then came the final blow. I pulled the legal papers out from behind a cushion on the sofa. The divorce filing, the asset freezing order, and the notification that due to the financial fraud evidence I had provided, all his corporate assets were being investigated and that he was legally required to vacate the premises by 8 a.m. the next morning, or face legal removal. Your flight is Thursday at 6 a.m., isn't it? I asked, looking at my watch. Well, you'll still be flying on Thursday, Mark. Just not to Cabo. You'll be flying solo, and you won't be taking a penny with you. The house is under my name, the car is mine, and every single cent of that shared savings account is now locked down for child support and alimony proceedings. He collapsed onto the armchair, defeated. He tried to argue. He tried to cry. He tried to appeal to my 15 years of devotion, but I was done. I was a rock again, but this time, the rock was made of ice and jagged edges. I didn't engage in the fight. I simply pointed to the papers and told him to call his lawyer, a lawyer who, by the way, I had already preemptively called and informed about the depth of his financial troubles, just to ensure they would charge him a significant, non-refundable retainer immediately. I gave him 2 empty duffel bags and told him he had 4 hours to pack only his clothes. The next morning, Thursday, the original day of his planned escape to paradise, he left. Not with Chloe on a beachfront property, but dragging his cheap bags into an Uber, headed for a low-cost, extended-stay hotel room. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger or sadness. It was the realization that his carefully constructed, fraudulent life had been dismantled by the 2 people he had carelessly underestimated, his quiet wife and his perceptive daughter. Lily watched him go from the window, and when the car pulled away, she looked up at me and smiled. A genuine, relieved, childhood smile that I hadn't seen in over a year. The aftermath was long and messy, as divorces always are, but because I had all the evidence and had initiated the financial freeze so quickly, I had the leverage. Mark's corporate career was completely destroyed due to the espionage scandal, making him virtually unemployable in his previous field. The offshore money was eventually returned through court orders, secured for Lily's future. Chloe, naturally, vanished the moment she realized her Marky was broke, professionally ruined, and tied up in legal investigations. We heard rumors that she quickly found another wealthy Mark, which only solidified the reality of Mark's pathetic choices. My life, however, became fundamentally better. I went back to school part-time to update my credentials and start working professionally again, using my analyst skills for good this time, and I regained my peace and self-respect. The house finally felt like ours again, just me and Lily. So, that's the story of the card I received on Mother's Day. A card that didn't just contain a note, but contained the future. It's a testament to the fact that you should never underestimate the quiet one in the relationship, and you should always listen to your kids. Lily's courage saved us both from financial ruin and prolonged emotional damage. She didn't write me a poem that day, but she gave me the greatest gift a mother could receive, the truth and the chance to fight for our survival. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know it's long, but the details matter when you're talking about 3 days that changed everything. It took courage, cunning, and an incredible amount of emotional suppression to get through those 72 hours, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Remember that moment when I asked you what you would have done? I hope now you understand why I chose the path of cold, hard calculation. If you're on my side, if you think my calculated revenge was justified given the circumstances and the financial threat to my daughter, please hit that like button right now and show your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more deeply personal, dramatic stories straight from the archives. And finally, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think Mark ever truly realized the depth of his betrayal, or was he too self-absorbed to care? Let me know your theories. I'll see you all in the next story.